Good afternoon, and welcome to the 50th at Noon lecture series. I'm John Kilborn, Professor of Movement Science and a faculty member on the 50th Anniversary Steering Committee. Working closely with Terry Losi and Robbie Ossipoff from the President's Office, we have together created the 50th at Noon lecture series, similar to Arts at Noon. Our goal was to provide a forum for students, faculty, and staff to learn about the wonderful history of Grand Valley State University. Over the course of this academic year, there will be 4 presentations, 2 in the fall term and 2 in the winter term. Our first presentation featured 2 of the people whose vision and perseverance helped make Grand Valley State University what it is today, Provost Emeritus Glenn Niemeyer and President Emeritus Don Lubbers. Today's presentation is titled The Early History of Physical Education and Intercollegiate Athletics at Grand Valley State University and features Professor Emeritus Joan Boand and recently retired Professor James Scott. To help build a bridge from the past to the present, I would like to introduce our current athletic director, Mr. Tim Selgo, to introduce our distinguished presenters.
Thank you, John, and thank you for being here today. It's an honor for me to introduce today's speakers to you. Both Joan Boand and Jim Scott are members of the Grand Valley State University Athletic Hall of Fame, and deservedly so. Both were longtime faculty in movement science, highly respected in their field by all of their colleagues, and it's my pleasure again to introduce them to you. They're going to share their thoughts with you, obviously, about both movement science and intercollegiate athletics from the beginning and growth of them throughout the years here at Grand Valley. So we're truly honored and a special day for us to hear from Jim and Joan today. I'm going to introduce both of them at the same time, and they're going to come up and do their dialogue with you. I'll start by introducing Joan Boand, who is truly a leader in coaching, teaching, and administration of women's athletics and all of our athletic programs during her time at Grand Valley State University. Joan held head coaching positions at GVSU in basketball, volleyball, softball, and track and field. And she was known throughout the country as an outstanding coach by all of her colleagues. She amassed more than 700 total wins, and her Grand Valley teams won 10 GVSU championships during her coaching career. And during her time as our head volleyball coach, she amassed a record of 557 wins, 330 losses for a 628 winning record, and 5 straight GVSU championships from 1973 to 1977, and including 6 GVSU championships overall. She blazed the trail in women's basketball, leading the Lakers to a 132-48 record, a 733 win percentage, and 4 straight GVSU titles from 1974 to 1977. I think you can see we enjoy great success today in our women's athletic programs, in large part because of that great start and foundation that Joan provided for our programs. And as an advocate for women's athletics, Joan served on countless conference, regional, and national NCAA committees in various capacities for over 25 years. Joan served as our Associate Athletic Director and was instrumental in Grand Valley being selected to host the first NCAA Division II, Division III Women's Golf National Championships. And since that time, we will actually be hosting the National Championships of Women's Golf this spring, and that will be our 7th National Championship that we have hosted in golf. So once again, Joan began a great tradition. As our wrestling coach at Grand Valley for 22 years, Jim Scott brought the Grand Valley wrestling program to national prominence. We had 52 individual All-American Award winners, 7 national champions in the NAIA and NCAA Division II, twice finished second in the nation in the NAIA, 3 All-Americans in NCAA Division I. You are allowed in the sport of wrestling. At those days, you could compete in Division I. And we had 3 individuals be All-American in Division I. Jim's teams won 7 GVSU titles, 6 straight top 5 finishes at the national tournament in the late 70s and early 80s. His involvement in the national wrestling community brought the U.S. Olympic trials to Grand Valley in 1984, and Jim has also been inducted into the Michigan Wrestling Hall of Fame. The last decade or so, of course, Jim was more known as a movement science professor, and a great one at that. And on occasion, I get to speak to alumni groups. And invariably, when I do that, an alum will come up to me and ask, is Jim Scott still there? He was one of the best teachers I ever had. Almost every time they mention that. And so obviously, Jim has held the respect of students throughout his career. And that is an indicator of the type of respect that our speakers have had throughout their careers in athletics and in teaching in the movement science program from students and colleagues alike. And with that, I'm going to turn the program over to Joan Boand and Jim Scott.
Joan and I have decided to just talk a little bit as we go through the slides. We have two basic slide presentations. One is just a text lineage of what happened here over time. Some people have told me that they're going to check and make sure I'm accurate. As accurate as we can be, given all the records that don't exist. And we're going to try and do this between 1963 to about 1982, maybe a little after that when it comes to some coaching records, but we'll need to kind of move right along as quickly as we can. Here's a timeline.
Jim, go back to the first program.
Okay.
First picture. Okay, there you have the first physical education facilities of Grand Valley, right there. The big
Farmhouse.
barn on your right was our outdoor and our indoor warm-up area. Hung a archery net on the side of it for archery. The house on your right was known as a crew house. It was nothing but a farmhouse, but it housed a classroom, sawhorses and plywood to sit around the table. Had a locker room that also served as a dance studio, and offices downstairs and upstairs. It was very primitive. What was really neat about it, though, the outdoor facilities weren't much. Tennis court, archery, we had tumbling, everything was outdoors. But the students could sit at the top of Lake Michigan Hall, which at that time was like a cafeteria, and they could look out across the field. There was a parking lot, tennis courts, and then the crew house in the barn. And they could look there and they see the class started to get organized, and off they go. They'd run across the thing so they wouldn't be late for class and hurry up. Okay.
Those of you who weren't here to hear President Emeritus Lubbers and Provost Niemeyer talk, the times in the 60s were very different. It was kind of a cultural revolution going on. The hippies were here and all of that stuff. Not just here, they were everywhere. Some of them are still here. So, we talk about campus diversity today. I think it was probably more diverse then than it was than it has been recently. It was very, very a different group of people. Collections of small colleges as opposed to Grand Valley State College. It started out that way, but it became colleges. Shortly thereafter, the first class was a class of 67, started in 63, and they had about 262 students, so we've grown a little bit since then. Chuck Irwin was the first person in the physical education department. This isn't a movement science presentation because movement science didn't come along until just a few years ago. Helen Freeman came as the second person, and we have a pictorial history here as well that we hope we can get through to show you the faces of these people, because I think that's kind of important. Then in 65, Dave Sharphorn came on. These people all were assistant professors. There were a couple of people that kind of were hired in but couldn't serve, so they had to share some time. Joan came in 1966. And Jack Anderson came the same time. Jack was assistant professor and also coached rowing, was brought here primarily for rowing. And then as the time goes along, the dome opened up. The dome around here sometimes is a bad word, but it was, at the time it was viewed as potentially a 4-building complex, I believe, with a plan for a swimming pool right where the swimming pool is, for a field house on one side and a women's gym on the other side. That's what they called that, right?
Yeah, and I think somewhere in the back of somebody's mind, they had an idea that there should be an indoor ice rink for hockey, too, on one side of it, which
Yeah, that was right.
I don't think hasn't come to fruition. I don't think it ever will. Maybe. What do I know?
So 68 brought Bill Klinger and Steve Arova. Jack Anderson left, and Steve came as a rowing coach. I came in 69. And interesting, in 1970, Chuck Irwin's title changed. He was promoted to associate professor, but at the same time was named as the athletic director. And there wasn't such a thing here before that. There was no athletics, so to speak, kind of. But they had to do that because they were bringing in football the next year. Rip Collins came in as an assistant professor. He was also the first football coach in that same year. Paul Springer came in to coach rowing and teach in the physical education department. Helen Freeman retired, and Tony Paul came in. Tony took over and did some, mostly an academic twist, I think, for our department. She also coached tennis for us. 72, there was another change that took place. Don Dufek was hired as an athletic director and put underneath the administrative structure in the university so that he was reporting not to an academic department, but to a department other than an academic unit. Principally, he was brought in to correct some problems that were existing at the time with the 1 and 22 football team, I think. But anyway. By this time, the first president, Jim Zumberg, had left, and President Lubbers was here. Interesting stories. Tom Villamere was, we don't have time for them all.
Well, I think the catalyst here was the fact when President Lubbers came in 69, he believed in football. And he believed that football gave a campus a presence, and therefore, we had football.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if we have time, I have an interesting reflection by President Zumberg on athletics and some memos that he wrote to Chuck and that kind of thing. Tom Villamere came in as the basketball coach. Dave Sharphorn had retired and moved into administration and became kind of a liaison between the university and the legislative process in Lansing. And so he had actually moved out of the department, was still with Grand Valley. Jim Harkema came as the football coach. Jim and I actually grew up in 2 towns separate from each other, and I was already here, and when Don told me that Jim had applied, I remembered him as a really, really outstanding quarterback and outstanding athlete at Kalamazoo College. And I said, I think we got the right guy there. So anyway, Dave was our first director of recreational services, and then Chuck Irwin retired in 74. Dr. McDonald came in, George McDonald came in. He was hired as a physical education department chair, not as a physical education athletic director. He was here specifically for physical education, and in fact served in the dean's office as an assistant dean in the College of, hi Stephen, thank you for being here. But served in a capacity whereby we really needed to work with the athletics, and so Don was here for that. He had left. George came in as when Don Dufek left, and George took over and became appointed as an athletic director and chair of the physical education department. And at that time, then recreation was still here, and therapeutic recreation was developing, and so that was all coming into our department. And Dr. McDonald served both of those units then, athletics and physical education. And then the dome became a negative thing around here. Most people say the dome collapsed and it was because it's gone. Actually, the dome is still there. The superstructure of the dome is still there. That's the central building of the athletic complex. It's the roof that was problematic. There was one person killed in its construction, and there was another, of course, then the roof itself caved in, and we needed to do something. And if you think economic times were bad here now, in those times, we had gas lines, and I can remember driving back and forth between here and home thinking, I wonder if we're ever going to be able to afford Christmas lights again. They actually took off half of the lights in the campus as an energy conservation mechanism.
Actually, the dome didn't collapse. It leaked first. It leaked really bad. we were running a tournament basketball game, and we had to have people to wipe up the floor at either end. Every time the teams went down to one end, they'd wipe the floor where they just left, and vice versa, because it leaked so badly. And when they did take the dome down, excuse me, I sat in the parking lot and watched. It took 2 swings of the ball to get it. The first one, it cracked, and the second time, the whole dome just fell in. Safe.
Yeah, we came in one morning and it looked like the Atlantic Ocean in there with a maple floor all warped and had just, it was unbelievable. But, you know, when you've got lemons, you need to make lemonade. So George McDonald, Dave Sharphorn, some local politicians, and some of the others of us recruited people internally and externally and decided that we needed to have funding for a new facility. So in 1982, the new facility, which included the arena that exists now, although that's been redone since then, the central round facility that upstairs houses athletic offices, trophy cases. In fact, if you walk along the trophy cases, that's actually the old track, that curve that went all the way around that facility. And we added a swimming pool at the time, which the hallways from the original building to the swimming pool were always there, and so they just opened those up. And Dewey Newsom came on shortly after that. Before that, Joan was the aquatics director, right? You did almost everything in the pool anyway.
Well, use the term loosely, no director. Just kind of taught swimming, and we taught it winter semester we were in quarters, winter quarter, because we of course couldn't use the outside. And 8 o'clock on Monday morning, that was the class. And Grand Valley had an old white and blue bus. It was a school bus repainted. And somebody from the plant department would fire that bus up, and myself and the students would hop on the bus, and we'd go down to the West Y, and I have swimming class. The driver come back and get another class, take the other class back, taught 2 classes. Very interesting. Real eye-opener, 8 o'clock on Monday morning, out in the frozen tundra.
So here's our early 63 activity courses that were taught. No college credit. First professional course ever taught was first aid and athletic training combined as one course. And a minor shows up in 1964. And these are activity courses that were eventually added. You can see that there was some gender discrimination, men only, women only, you know, separate courses, those kinds of things. Some more activity courses. Joan taught water skiing. Joan had a water ski program in Grand Haven. It was Saturday night special before the fountain went off, wasn't that? That's what happened. Really. She and her husband ran a water ski show at Grand Haven, right, in front of the...
Yes. Yeah, we did the water throw show in Grand Haven. That's where we got the boats for the water skiing. We rented those from the University or college rented those from the Water Show Corporation. So in 64, a minor shows up. These are the courses that were in the minor. You can see in theory and practice of women's sports, that was by the season. So there was a fall sport, a winter sport, and a spring sport, and that's because we were, of course, on terms at this time. It's kind of
quarters, whatever you call it.
Excuse me, Jim, I jump over you, but it's kind of interesting. When we started over in the crew house, farmhouse, whatever, everything was co-ed because there weren't that many students. Taught a volleyball class once, it was 6, but it was all co-ed. And then when we moved into the dome area, it became separate, men's and women's, and never the twain shall meet. But then along came Title IX, and what happened? Yeah, we went back to co-ed again.
In 66, a major program shows up, so all the courses that were in a minor plus these others were added. Anatomy and physiology. Tim Strickler, you're here, right? We taught that in our department. How about that, eh? But we only did that for a couple of years until the health science department or whatever. What was that called at the time? Okay. Started, and so then they taught anatomy and physiology, and we kept it for our students. But that's, there's a little bit of a show here. Wow, what are we doing this year? Doesn't look like movement science or physical education, but...
Well, the recreation and administration of parks and recreation, that kind of eventually evolved into therapeutic rec, and that's where therapeutic rec got its start. We'll go on when it talks about some of the hires. We hired someone to teach some of those classes.
And these are courses that showed up as early as 1973 that were in recreation. It was a recreation minor kind of thing. Some earlier things that happened, I don't have dates for, but things that I recalled as development during that time were, like Joan said, all the courses became coeducational eventually. Dance, there was a dance performance and a dance education. There's still that argument, right, Elizabeth, about, dance and dance, isn't that it? Did I say that right? All right. And so dance was moved out, came back for a little while, and then went back again. So but we still do a lot of dance in our department, probably considered more in association with the physical education, movement science. Kinesiology was split up from, at one time, kines and exercise physiology, all that content was in one area. And at this time, in the 70s, the space program had proliferated a lot of science about movement and exercise and all of that. You can't shoot somebody off into space without at least knowing if they're alive. So there was this telemetry that had developed, and so physiology of activity started to develop its own area, and so we split that course apart. I know mostly about that because I taught that. That was what I was doing. But athletic training became an emphasis in the Doug's back there. See if I have this right? An emphasis in the major. Coaching became an emphasis in the major, and fitness and wellness developed as time went along. This was just kind of the evolution of the department. And as Joan said, recreation kind of morphed into therapeutic recreation. So we're going to go fairly quickly here. Chuck Irwin was the first chair, then George McDonald, then Mike Kowalczyk, then Fred Andres. Then we had a couple of years there where Patty Rowe was serving, and we were under the health sciences. I don't know if some of us remember that or not. And then Nancy Giardina came in, and then Patty took over as the chair, and now we have Brian. So that's kind of that deal. If you look at sports and the coaches, rowing is probably considered the first sport here. Chuck Irwin did that. I think it was under direction of those who were here, Jim Zumberg and George Potter. George came particularly with a English influence, and they were looking at unique activities. So basketball, Dave Sharp. When Dave came on, he came on and did a lot of the basketball, cross country, tennis, and then Joan softball in '67, right?
Yes, and I have to say that this was an accidental thing. This was nothing planned or nothing intended, but one of the senior students came to me and said, I have some friends that go to junior college, and they have a softball team. Could we get a softball team? Me and my naivety, yeah, sure, find the players. So this enterprising student did go out and find the players, and that was the start of it. She found enough players. I made a couple phone calls. I think we played 2 games. We did the same thing the following spring, and maybe played 4 games. I don't know. Don't have recall, and we don't have the records on it. But that was actually the start. It was initiated from the students, and it was something that they wanted, and it was something that I felt I should give to them, and I did. And from then it evolved when the dome was built, and we were going to start in '67, '68. Volleyball was a fall sport for women, and I thought, well, this is an opportunity. If the men are going to go in there and have basketball, why can't the women go in there and play volleyball? So as I like to tell people, when they went into the field house or the dome building, I went right behind them, or if not, alongside of them. And if they had practice time at 3, I thought I needed to have practice time at 3. I think there were a lot of people that weren't happy. Volleyballs flew around an awful lot, and I think it was maybe dangerous in some aspects, but we had curtains we could put down and everything. But that was actually the start, initiated by students and then followed through with the rest.
Baseball started in '68, and then Bill Klinger came, of course, and track and field started. Joan, as she mentioned, official seasons now showing up. '69, wrestling came in. Football, 1970, that was the first year. And tennis was still going at that time, too.
I have to interrupt Jim again, but I just thought that the women needed something besides the team sports, and I kind of asked Helen Freeman if she would consider coaching tennis. And she did do it for the 1 year before she retired. And then when Tony Paul came and took her place. Tony took the tennis over, and I was grateful for that. So we had another sport to offer the women.
So here's the rowing lineage, starting with Chuck, going down through quite a long list, and this, of course, now is a club sport. And it was dropped as a sport about 1982 or 1983 as a varsity sport. And this is the lineage of golfers, their coaches, long time through there, the years they were there. Basketball for men. Did I spell your name right, Rick? I looked at that and thought, oh, that's not right. Cross country. This is when Jerry and Baltus and Bill Klinger are working together to try to put this timeline together and really identify who was here when. So
I'll interrupt Jim again. I talked and tried to get Bill Klinger to start cross country for women. I didn't win that battle, but when he left and Gary Martin took over, I did win that battle. We were able to get cross country for women, and that started the cross country. Also, in there in '76 when Anne Rancourt came, she was from the East, and field hockey, of course, is a big sport in the East. It wasn't really big in Michigan except on the east side of the state, and I thought that we needed another sport for women, so kind of organized a field hockey team. Didn't go very well because Michigan really didn't play that much field hockey. Plus, as soon as the girls' sports came into the high school, they had basketball in the fall, and all the athletes played basketball in the fall. There weren't any people to play field hockey, so field hockey only lasted a couple of years.
This is the women's basketball. Coaches over the time periods. Baseball. Phil Regan is a fairly familiar name to baseball buffs. Fireman of the Year, I think. He came in as most saves in the Major League Baseball for a while. This is the softball lineage. Did I get that right, Doug? I got the years right? Okay, all right.
Yeah.
And this is football. From the beginning up to the present. Didn't put any records in here. You can look at those that lasted a short period of time had poor records. Those that had better records. And this is wrestling. I was here for 22 years, and Tim kind of ran through the things we did. Thank you, Tim, for helping us out with that. That's still a club sport and pretty popular in the club sports. Here's Joan's 26 years, right, of volleyball. There.
I was thinking about the first teams and everything, and the first uniforms and things that I thought we ought to have. You know how we got our first uniforms? We went over to the bookstore and bought T-shirts and ironed on tape, and we could iron the numbers on. So that was where our first volleyball and basketball uniforms. Didn't think the numbers were so important in softball, but eventually we did get some uniforms and get some shirts with numbers on it, but that's what we had to do. I did a lot of improvising and did a lot of begging too.
This is retro year, right, Tim? We're doing retro uniforms. Yeah, wait till you see some of these. The formation of the GLIAC Grand Valley was pretty instrumental in that. I think Lake Superior State really led the way because they needed a tie to downstate for some survival issues. So here are your original group, and then some others that joined. Bud Cooper is probably was the motivating force for this, and Grand Valley won the first, and I think maybe the first 3 President's Cups.
Yeah,
and,
I think that's right. We didn't no softball in there. We should have softball. We didn't have enough schools to play softball in the GLIAC when it was first started, but we would have won that too. Oh, we had some good softball players. Bud Cooper, the AD at Lake Superior State. We went up there to play the team, and we were playing on a playground with a tree in the middle of it and everything. But somebody went out and got him. He came out in his overcoat because he had to watch this girl hit the ball. And that girl was Pat Baker-Gribb. She just swung. I don't know how many home runs she hit that day, but we were a pretty good team.
So here's the list of athletic directors. If you look at them, put them in line. Chuck Irwin was the first. He stayed here after 72. Don Dufek came in from 72 to 76. George was appointed then and took over when Don left, and they put the department back together. It was separated for a while there. Mike Kowalczyk was here, and then Tim. So we don't have a long list, but lots of really fun folks there. And here, this is part of where I got the information and also the pictures that we'll see coming up here next. So a big thanks to these people, even though they may not know they were helpful, they were because they maybe gave me directions and things like that. School colors, we actually have a date for that. Either Hawaiian blue or Air Force blue. I know Hawaiian blue, Chuck said we can't do that because the Detroit Lions actually have that color patented. So, because I think the school just said light blue. And then it was black and blue for Grand Valley U, because I think there's been some reference to that before. And there have been a couple of elections, that some of which they paid attention to and some of which they didn't. So we just seem to keep being Lakers. So interesting thing, George McDonald's father was a Laker. I don't know if you remember that or not.
Yes, yeah, he was a Laker. He was a ship captain on the
Ship's
Great
captain
Lakes.
on the Great Lakes. So he helped us refine exactly what that meant. So I'm going to switch on to the pictures here. It'll take a moment or two.
While he's switching on the pictures, I'll talk. In the beginning, the women nationally had a separate national organization for athletics that was called the AIAW, Association of Intercollegiate Athletics for Women. And we had a state organization which was called the State of Michigan Intercollegiate Athletics for Women. And this existed until the early 80s when the NCAA saw the light dawning on women's athletics, and they decided this was something that they ought to look at. So the NCAA then added women's athletics to their national organization, and that was how the AIAW just kind of faded away and died. The AIAW thought they had a new model. They wanted to avoid the pitfalls that the men had made. I think they had a good idea. It was very idealistic, and they couldn't hold on to it. But we have the pattern that you know today. One national organization, the NCAA, some lesser ones, NAIA, National Christian Conference, et cetera. But that's how we came to be in the NCAA.
So this is a pictorial history. This is just kind of a cruise through time. So this will be kind of fun. Some of these people, of course, have passed away, as with Chuck Irwin. And if your picture appears here and you're proud of it, you can stand up. My guess is there won't be a lot of people standing. But credited with lots of things. This is probably where it all started. And as Joan and I were talking earlier, Chuck had a tendency to hire people he knew. And so it was really important to him to be known by him. I think Joan's connection may have been through Jerry Ford. We're not sure about that, but we think maybe that's early.
Don't know, always wonder.
This picture I got offline. If you want to see lots of historical pictures, you can actually go onto the Grand Valley website and go into the 50th anniversary. Library has scanned a lot of them in. There's a lot more than what there are here, and you can just kind of peruse through there. This one says something about students and faculty members coming to bring the boat. Well, this is the boat that Minor Keeler bought from Harvard University, and I think Minor is one of these people. It might be the person in the back. This is the first director of libraries. This is Weldon Fraze, who's also in the Sport Hall of Fame. He's a psychology person who was the first athletic faculty representative. Yeah. And this is Jim Zumberg. That's probably George Potter. That's Chuck, right? George Potter, okay. And that's Chuck Irwin. Do you know who this is? I'm not asking that because I'm going to pull a surprise. I'm actually trying to figure out who that is. But I'd kind of like that car in the background. That'd be kind of nice. For those of you of rowing, you can see we've improved a lot. I don't know if there's any rowers here or not, but all the splashes should be together, but they're not. So that's the early year. That's like, whoops, wait a minute, this is supposed to go straight. This is Helen Freeman. Helen was the first woman faculty member here. She and Chuck taught together at Grand Rapids Central High School. And he brought her in as first woman's faculty member. And then again, the farmhouse and the field house. There's another car that we might like to have. We just would have saved all those, right, Tim? We'd have the ones we want. This is Dave Sharphorn, credited as he's in the Hall of Fame as the coach. And as you remember, if you remember from the other things, why he coached a lot of different sports here. And
There's those uniforms. And
those uniforms.
Those were printed on. Those were
iron-on letters. Tim,
no,
we
those
should
weren't
do
the
this
iron-on.
for retro, right? That's retro right there.
You have to get to the volleyball, basketball teams for that, but those were printed on.
And although you may be drawn to the people in the picture and so on, I think in the background, here's the dome. It was actually quite an impressive facility from the inside. This is Jack Anderson, first rowing coach, taught kinesiology. This is Bill Klinger, track. He taught gymnastics and golf for us as activities, courses. Steve Arova, who was Italian. Actually, he went on, I think, to coach the Olympic rowing team from Italy. After he left here, he went to Columbia, I believe. So.
You know, he taught. He could speak 6 languages. He was a very unique person.
There was quite a strong European, British emphasis to the early curriculum and the early sport program here. Tried to be a little bit non-traditional. Let's not get into that football thing. There's communications from Jim Zumberg about that issue. If we have time, I'll show him to you. And then there's, that's me, and that's a long time ago. This is one of those teams that was second in the nation. We probably got it because we were so ugly. And this is Rip Collins, the first football coach at Grand Valley. Also a World War II veteran like Chuck Irwin. Both of them kind of cut out of granite, pretty quiet, deep emotions. I think the war had a huge impact. Paul Springer, who's right here, and also right here. This is one of the first shells that they dedicated when rowing was a varsity sport. This is Don Dufek. I was thinking about starting this with what are the ties between here and other places, but Don Dufek was our athletic director, and I got this off from an old ticket to one of the Michigan football games because they were celebrating Don, who scored the winning touchdown and one other touchdown in the Rose Bowl in 1949. And he was our athletic director, so it was kind of just interesting stuff. And this is him here during the dedication of a shell. Tom Villamere, a long-standing basketball coach. Jim Harkema, here. This is the first football staff under Coach Harkema. This is the first victory, and this, by the way, is your football field, in case you didn't notice it. The press box starts about where the car is and goes that way. George McDonald, here he is with one of the first President's Cups, emblematic of winning the all-sports trophy in the Great Lakes Conference. And here he is with his horn on the field and his Laker hat. I think he actually was pretty proud of being a Laker, and I see his son is here. You can probably document that, right?
Yes, Lakers are tough sons of bitches.
That's it. There we go. That comes from George right down through Neil, right? George's son, Neil, for those of you who don't know, teaches here in the biology department, right? Chair. Oh, well. Man, look at what happens when you go to sleep at your desk and just before you retire. So this is the new stadium, but the existing field. This is prescription athletic turf developed at Purdue University. Tim, do we still have the tunnels or the pipes underneath and the heating coils? None of that ever developed. We paid tons of money for this. I don't know what Ron Van Steelen is here. I don't know if it was during your time that Okay, we spent a lot of money for pumps to suck water off the field and heating coils underneath and cover it up and the grass will grow. And well, I think we got to the part where we dug the trenches and filled them all in and connected the pumps, but nothing ever happened after that. But it does drain, and this is obviously the construction of the football field around that time, around the existing field. Before that, we took bleachers from the old dome, put a high-low underneath them and drove them out and set them next to the field right along here. That was how we did football in those days.
And then they spent the winter in the back of the field house.
Yeah.
It got covered with snow and warped.
So this is the third football staff. Coach Giese in the middle, Fred Cromie, Bruce Spiegel. One of the early baseball teams, probably the earliest. This is Hugo Salazar. He taught in the Spanish department, and his wife was in the theater department here, Laura Salazar. She's still, I think, alive and in Florida. He passed away within the last year or so. And I can probably name a few of these. Larry Aldridge right there. I'm not sure about the others. Early basketball teams here again, inside the dome. You can see this. Danny Poole was an assistant. Paul Springer was an assistant. Dave Sharphorn coached both of those teams before we had the dome and after. This is the first football team. I coached at Northview before I came here. So I was going through this presentation, could almost name almost every kid in there because I had them in, about half of them in high school. They just said, yeah, we're going to do football out there. Come on along. Yeah, how do I get in, you know? Some things never change. But anyway. Tim Cohane, he was an early athlete of ours who was the first national competitor in decathlon back in the 70s. A really good athlete. This is John Mahan. This is Al Dode, our first quarterback, and Rip Collins in the back. The reason you don't see me in the picture is I'm holding the camera, so we didn't have sports information at the time. First football victory, I've used this as a second time, but Tom Teft and Paul Griffith and Bob Simmons. Jim Schaap is back in there. Bill Paul. This is Kerry Rosikas, quarterback at the time. Some early basketball Hall of Fame, early Hall of Fame members in basketball. This is Pat Baker-Gribb. This is Donna Sass. They're both in the Hall of Fame.
I guess I have to jump in here.
Yep.
One of the things that Grand Valley did in '75 was, and out of the blue, it's nothing I ever expected in my wildest dreams. George McDowell said to me one day, and I don't even know if it was George, maybe it was Don, I guess it was Don Dufek, you have going to have some athletic scholarships for women. Oh, it was something I did not expect at all. But they did. They gave us some money. Donna Sass, whose picture's there in the uniform, she was our first recruited athlete. And then the game began. I learned about recruiting in a hurry. But just another piece of.
Yeah, I think Grand Valley may have been the first school maybe in the country to give athletic scholarships to women.
Well, I know we were the first in the state of Michigan. I don't know about the country, pretty close to it.
Pretty close.
But during that period of time, we could really compete against some of the big teams, go down to Michigan, and I use some of the big schools, I should say, big teams, no, big schools. Go down to Michigan, play them, beat them, Michigan State, beat them, basketball, volleyball. We could do that then because we were able to get some very good athletes. And the amount of money that we got would be a mere drop in the bucket today because wave prices have, I think the first scholarship was $300. That might have been tuition.
It probably was tuition at the time. So, don't give a wrestling coach time to talk because he will. So I had some other first. This is the first All-American that Grand Valley had in any sport, Rick Boand, and he's right here. Rick, right there. This is Mark Mangiani, the first national champion. I'd have him stand up, but he's in Arizona, where all of the rest of us would like to be, probably. Mike Abrams, he was our first Division I national place winner. Tim had alluded to the fact that we had three athletes go all the way through and get onto the Division I national chart. And three of them placed. Actually, we had four go, three placed. This is Ron Essink. It was a wrestling triple crown. They're referring to the fact that During that year, he won the NAI National Championship, the Division II National Championship, was outstanding wrestler at that tournament, then went on to the Division I National Championship, and he lost. He only had one loss that season, well, actually two. He lost in the wrestlebacks too, but that was because we were a little down. It was third tournament in a row, but the guy he lost to was a guy named Bruce Baumgartner. Some of you may remember that. 6-time world champion heavyweight, who at the time was a sophomore at Edinburgh State. So anyway, that was his only loss. We felt pretty good about that loss. Sorry about that. Here's the interior of the dome. Pretty impressive track around the outside, lots of room, maple hardwood floor to set up, interior. There's a basketball game going on, pom-poms, and a view from the outside.
Jim, the bottom right-hand picture, first person in the lane on the left-hand side, Kim Hansen, one of our best athletes we ever had. She was here because we had a scholarship. She didn't live very far away, and she was definitely a Division I player. She was a 6-foot guard, but she was a player.
And here's the dome. This is in the post era. It had been condemned. If you see the field hockey, you see this fence along this is to keep people off the dome because they thought it would collapse, and obviously you can see there's some kind of danger going on here. So we were able to use the other parts of the building, but certainly not the upstairs area. And this is an early picture. I think this is probably about 1973. Championships in women's basketball. That's not the women's basketball coach. This is the women's basketball coach and the volleyball coach, and 2 of these are hers. We needed somebody to hold the other one, so we recruited this guy. So that's President Lubbers in his early days. So, and
the gentleman next,
Tom Hokia.
yeah, he was the first Great Lakes commissioner. I think he was a lobbyist out of Lansing.
Mm-hmm. And this is probably one of the first President's Cups. Bruce Lacine was our reporting officer, the officer we reported to. You can see some lovely faces there from the past. Early activity classes, lots of outdoor stuff going on. Ski hill, you all know we did have a ski hill, right?
Bottom left-hand side, I don't know who that is, but it could be me out there teaching skiing. Coldest job I ever had. Awful.
I think this was here when Leroy was here too, right? Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Leroy Hackley was our recreation director at the time, and we tried to freeze water and get ice and all of that. So here's what the stadium used to look like. I don't think that's what we have for outdoor facilities now. The Great Laker. This, I believe, is probably the dedication of the football field out there. It's some I found, and these are some people, again, to thank relative to who we had at the time. All of them helped me find all these pictures.
I think we should give them a standing ovation. I'm so appreciative of what they've done. Thank you so much.
Jim did all the work. I didn't do anything.
But without their efforts and the efforts of others, none of us would be here today. We do have time for a few questions, if there's anyone that has a question for Jim or Joan, and then we have some presentations of our appreciation for each. So are there any questions?
Tim? They would be over here, kind of to the left of where Niemeyer Hall is. Kind of the far end of the parking lot outside of Lake, yeah, between there and the art building. By the ravine, yeah, ready to fall off into the ravine. There were 3 houses here. One was known as the Pink Farmhouse. One was known as the Gray Farmhouse.
They were on 45. They were on
M45.
This was unique in the fact that to get over there, the only way you could get there, you'd have to drive across the tennis courts. And the first time I came, I couldn't believe this. I mean, this was sacrilegious to me. You don't drive across a tennis court. And I had come for an interview, and Helen Freeman was waiting for me on the other side, and I'm going like, how do I get there? And she goes, okay. So I drive across the tennis courts. But that's what they had, right? Parking lot, at Lake Michigan Hall, parking lot, tennis courts. And there was no road over there. till I think finally somebody did make one. But it was mostly over in, the crew house was closer to the vicinity of where the art thing is on the top of the ravine there. Because when we played volleyball out there, the ball would go down the ravine.
Never find it again.
Well, you know, it took Title IX a long time to come to fruition. I mean, the law, it became a law, but it was a long time for universities and colleges to move towards it. We were a step ahead. Someone saw the handwriting on the wall, and I think that's why the scholarships came in '75. That gave us the jump on Title IX. It was easy for me from one respect. We had no traditions here. It was harder for people at the universities that had established athletic programs. When we would go down to Michigan and play, we had a locker room with curtains in it. At Western Michigan, we shared a locker room with a men's basketball team. They came off the floor and took showers while we dressed. Interesting. Co-ed locker rooms were not in my mind. But anyway, it was easy here. It was easy. But some places it was really difficult. It took a long time for some of the big universities to figure it out.
Other questions? All right, we have, I know some students have to get to class. We have gifts for each of you. First is Joan, a beautiful 50th anniversary shirt. This is part of our 50th anniversary, this series. And for my mentor when I came here, and
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Neat. Thank you very much.
so thank you all for coming. Our next 50th at noon will be next semester and features Chick Blue, who will talk about who our students have been over time at this university. What I didn't say is Jim's been he's retired recently. He's was my mentor when I arrived, and I refer to him as the wise one. So we're going to miss him. Thank you both very much, and thank you for coming. We'll see you at the next 50th at noon.